something with a mic? Anyway, this is when I need Brian. Oh, I think it's like right in front of my face. Um, okay, Eric, how's that? Eric? Oh, I hear the mic. It's rather loud. Okay. I thought it was because I was originally from New York. Is this like a Trump thing, right? Anyway, sorry, this is disgusting. Anyway, can you make it go? Can you put it down here so I'm not? It's not like in front of my face.
We'll have to give it.
Put it
Yeah,
like
yeah,
here.
got it. We'll
Sure.
put it. We'll put it between.
Tall guys will just have to.
Well, we'll adjust it between readers, okay, folks. So, give us a chance to do that between
Ellie,
each
how
reader.
tall are you?
How's this?
You're about
How's
the
this?
same as me, right? Yeah, we're the same.
So is that okay?
Okay, yeah, that's all right. Okay.
All right. Speak to me a little bit.
Speak to me. I'm speaking to you. How's
So,
that?
like you're
Is that okay?
crowd, could you do it a little robust level? You're gonna address the
Sing
crowd.
out, Louise.
Yeah, come on.
All right, sing out, Louise.
Okay,
All right.
all right.
How many people get that reference? Nobody? From Gypsy. Okay. Susan gets it. You do. I grew up on that, yeah. Okay, can I start? Oh, good. Hi, everybody. Before I forget, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Eric for having us. I want to thank Christine for getting Eric to have us. And Maxine, who has been a gift, Maxine Chernoff, poet, and our contributing poetry editor. Mike Medberry, whose story is very timely, unfortunately, is still timely, not about COVID. Hailey, Nicole Warner, our intern, who is now not an intern anymore and who contributed a great piece. We're going to, I just wanted to say that as I was thinking about this, it felt a little bit odd having an event for a book, Journal of the Plague Year, which you guys probably know I appropriated the title from Daniel Defoe, who wrote about an earlier plague. A book that sounds like it's about the pandemic, which everybody would like to forget, it appears. But in fact, I want to invoke Christine's phrase, which is the plague that infected history. There is much more in this book. We actually did virtually no health reporting, or we did some in the magazine, but it's not in this book. What we wrote about in this book, people wrote about their lives in relation to the changes that were going on. We also wrote about the events that seemed to be inflamed by the fear of death that was elicited but often denied. That tension that was going on. And we wrote about the plague of politics, which is a section in the book, which is, I just want to tell you a personal thing. As I was editing the book and I was reading at least one piece about what was going on in Portland, if you remember, when there were some kind of police, we don't really know what they were. They didn't have badges, and they were grabbing protesters, and they were bringing them to black sites, and they weren't like CIA black sites. They were not torturing them, but the protesters didn't know who these guys were, and they didn't know what was going to happen to them. And there was a habeas corpus. What is that, right? So I was rereading this, and I hadn't quite forgotten it, but things were happening so quickly over this whole period after we started the magazine that it wasn't front of mind anymore. I mean, there had been, so many things after that. And as I read that, getting the book together, which was needless to say, before the election, I, I, I was shocked, even though I had read all of it before. The gravity of it really hit me. So I believe that this book gives us some context for what we all are thinking about now. And the other thing it did, this might sound a little corny, but we really felt that it was a tribe, that our readers, our contributors, anyone who helped with the magazine, it gave us support during this time. And it's one of the reasons we kept going with it. Anyway, so now I will just introduce the readers. Hailey's going to be first, and then Christine, and then Maxine, and then Mike, whose truck broke down, but he heroically made it here with wine. I know, you might need it before you go on. And then I'll read something short at the end. I'm actually not going to read my piece, but I will read an essay that I think encapsulates kind of everything about this period in history by my co-editor, Brian, Cullman, who is a terrific writer. And it is the first piece in the book. I will also mention that Christine, who not only got this gig together, she is organized, and if you want tote bags, which I was prevailed upon to make, or books or blah blah blah, she can help you. We're going to give a discount for certain things, which I no longer remember. Anyway, so thanks so much, and here's Hailey's piece, and here is Hailey, Nicole Warner. After the readings. Go ahead, break a leg.
All right. Hi, everybody. When I was reading this piece, it was written in 2021, and it just reminded me of a lot of things that were washing over me at the time, and you called it a memoir, which I laughed at because people have to survive like catastrophes and have these incredible lives to have memoirs, and this was more like a personal diary entry that got put into the magazine somehow. So having said that, there's going to be a lot of complaining in this piece. Reading it again, I also realized that it was a tribute almost to my father, who was an incredible worker. That was just something he always did. He had passed away about a year before this was published, and reading it back, I was like, oh, wow, this was a tribute to him. And then in my appropriative way, writer's way and daughter's way, I took something he was good at, like working, and I made it my own by complaining about it, about how much working sucks. So I'll shut up and read. When I was in junior high and high school, my dad drove for a yellow cab company in Chico, California. He worked 60 hours a week, sometimes more, with a side hustle playing keyboard in funk bands, mostly casino gigs and concerts in the local plaza. He even picked up a few students on the side, young pianists looking to play charts or have the classical stiffness banged out of their fingers. He was a regular at Angie's Poker Club, on and off for years, and though he never spoke about it to me, my mom hinted that he wasn't half bad. According to her, some months he made enough for bills and child support just from playing poker. My dad had a way of turning his talents into money. He improvised until he had something that worked, and he was good at it. For years, he cycled this strange clock, driving nights and dedicating his days to the odd jobs. He was always tired. I never saw him without his travel thermos of coffee, and his kitchen table was cluttered with cabbie dispatch notes, sheet music, fast food wrappers, and coffee-stained napkins. At the end of the day, a Bud Light Michelada greeted him. It was the table of a working man. I don't think I could live like that, but now I understand his brand of proud tiredness. For wage workers, the day really begins when the workday ends. Only so many hours truly belong to us, so they count. This year, as COVID shook San Francisco, I worked 2 jobs in the Mission District while I finished my last year of college. For 5 months, I hopped from the opening shift at a cafe to the closing shift at a small retail shop. In the beginning, people were overly nice. We were all in shock, and the initial fear made us careful. People saw a glimpse of normalcy in the cafe, I think. In March and April, that seemed like something sacred. Summer was a different story. People felt pent up. In October, I watched a lady throw her smoothie at a man who had wronged her in some way that I didn't catch. Her exact words when she said it, "I'm more of a man than you'll ever be." Damn. The squabble fizzled out from there, but still these were complete strangers. I was taking an order when it happened and mentally checked out for a second during the transaction to keep from laughing at them or screaming. We all wanted to scream at that point. The cafe was located in the kind of tech-dominated $8 chai latte gentrified block that made me want to set San Francisco on fire. In its close proximity to Dolores Park, one of the city's most notorious party parks, when Pride season came in May, we had lines out the door, and the park looked just like it had the previous summer, packed to capacity. Aside from masks and stickers showing customers where to stand, it seemed nothing had changed, which was good for the owner, but made me nervous. Even without tourists, the cafe was almost back to normal capacity, but with half the staff. When we opened our patio for outdoor dining instead of takeout, my manager sat me down for a serious chat. We'd become pretty close over the 2 years I worked there. I knew both her daughters, and her husband was a chef in the cafe's kitchen. Her youngest son was just starting junior high. The mother and her told me to be careful, to sanitize everything, and we hugged with our masks, hiding something we couldn't say. We were terrified, but that feeling was muted by routine. In the mornings, we'd help ourselves to coffee, and our greetings was always the same. "How are you?" "Tired, but good." When fall came, I knew I couldn't work at the cafe anymore. I wanted to scream every day, but at who? Maybe not at the people leaving crumpled napkins on their table or the people who pulled down their masks to order, but it was heading there. So I quit one day after a man literally screamed in my face. My second job would be enough, I thought, and I was at much lower risk of infection there, working at the same small retail shop located deeper in the Mission, further away from Dolores and its foot traffic. Maybe I needed to run around less, too. For the entire year, I felt like I was in motion. Since July, I've lived in 3 different districts of San Francisco, though my bus to work hasn't changed. In September, I moved into a studio in San Francisco's outer Tenderloin. That means it's on the edge of what remains of one of the city's few ungentrified neighborhoods. From the 5th floor, there's a view of the taller brick buildings and hotels that make up the block. The first night was like a scene straight out of a sitcom. 2 small-town best friends turned roommates finally have their own little piece of the city. My roommate and I were exhausted from moving. We pushed our mattresses together to make room for the boxes we couldn't deal with. We ordered pad thai and popped a bottle of champagne. It had been a long time since we were excited about something. Our apartment in the city of insanely high rents was a small victory to hold against the year of losses. We opened the bay windows and listened to the sounds of the city below us. Then, like an emaciated Gandalf, there he was. In the window directly across from ours stood an old man wearing only a t-shirt and naked from the waist down. He was trembling slightly, looking right at us and jerking off shamelessly. We laughed at first. How could this be happening? But it did, constantly. Then we realized that the more we reacted, the more excited he became. He haunted us day and night. He was there so often, I wondered how it was even possible. Physically, I mean. We were dealing with a serial masturbator, so we called the cops. That got him to stop for the most part, and I didn't notice as much for a while because I wasn't there. A month after I quit my job at the cafe, and a few weeks after I moved into the apartment, I tested positive for COVID-19. I'm grateful for early detection and for symptoms so mild they almost went unnoticed. The city of San Francisco did put me up in a hotel, and for 2 weeks everything stopped. No bus rides, no need to act cheery to customers, and no Gandalf. Since then, I've fallen back into the routine of work hours and free hours. I'm resigned to it, but sometimes I still get that urge to scream. I don't have the temperament for poker, I guess. I'm still keeping it together at work, but whenever I see the serial masturbator or any modicum of my sanity disappears, I'll come home, and not always, but still, often enough, he'll be there in the window, waiting for me. It's a little different now, though, since the cops talk to him. His retreat is easily won by me leaning out the window and screaming as loud as I can, "Knock it off, fucker, you know who I'll call." Maybe that's the silver lining to all of this. That's the kicker. Now when I come home, tired and ready to scream, I'll have a target.
How do you follow the story of a serial masturbator?
Don't try too hard.
No worries.
See what we're gonna do here.
Next issue.
There you go.
Let's do this.
Okay.
Point this towards you.
Ah.
Is everything
I could
tightened up? I
Okay.
guess.
about here.
Yeah.
Okay. I should give fair warning that this piece is much longer than I'm able to read right now. And some of the stuff that I took out was the more personal stuff. Well, it's there too, but some of the personal stuff I can just simply say a kidnapped general and some other juicy stuff like worrying about street fighting in Padua between the Red Brigades and the fascists. But what this is really about is about a song. So I'm concentrating on the genesis of the song and how it had an effect on my life and the lessons that I take for it for now, especially, not just during the COVID time, but right now. During this plague year, I've been infected with memories of a strange song I discovered as an exchange student in Italy. The song has roots in the arts and history of Bergamo, the epicenter of Italy's COVID-19 outbreak. In the spring of 2020, more than half of the city's inhabitants tested positive for the virus, but not before the Regione had been so overwhelmed with death, grief, and exhaustion that funeral homes, mortuaries, and cemeteries could not contain it all. In the 70s, a conservatory-trained rock musician named Angelo Branduardi drew on medieval and Renaissance themes of love and death. One muse, if you will, was the time of plague in Italy. Not that recent plague, but the bubonic plague, the Black Death that ebbed and flowed for an astonishing 500 years. I would never have encountered Branduardi if I hadn't spent my junior year studying art history in Padua. When I returned to school in Davis, California, I played my Branduardi albums incessantly, trying to prolong something. They say that culture shock when you come back to America is worse than the culture shock when you're abroad. Everything is the same, yet feels different. I certainly found that to be true. Branduardi was my therapy. What rose to the top in my music rotation was Ballo in Fa diesis minore, Dance in F-sharp minor from the 1977 album La Pulce d'acqua, The Water Flea. The song stood out for its ancient melody and what felt like a compelling dialogue to a young woman questioning her identity. Branduardi played two roles, death and the artist appealing to death. For inspiration, Branduardi and his wife, Luisa Zappa, turned to images and music for a danza macabra. Not far from Bergamo, the city I noted earlier, is the little town of Clusone, famed for its Oratorio dei Disciplini, part of the Basilica of Santa Maria Assunta. On the oratorio exterior wall is a remarkable fresco depicting the triumph of death, painted in 1485. Nothing can prepare you for the force of triumphant death, a living skeleton, crowned and wearing a richly embroidered cloak spread over her victims of plague, the great and powerful, Pope and Emperor, the paupers, the developing mercantile class, the religious, the irreligious, the just and unjust. This is not the grim and abstractly masculine reaper. The representation is La Morte, the ancient feminine queen of death. In her bony hands are the ends of 2 unfurling scrolls declaring her power, but the only wealth she knows are lives. How does mass death affect us? Barring self-flagellation, what can stay death's hand, even for a brief while? Another inspiration for the song was Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal of 1957. In it, the night distracts death long enough to allow a minstrel and his family to escape. It is this minstrel who has the film's last words, as death leads the night and his other victims out of life. Music survives. Art lives on. But the song's material goes back further. Louise Zappa set the lyric from original text from a fresco painted in 1539 on the Church of San Vigilio in Pinzolo, a small town in the Italian Alps to the northeast of Closone. The fresco on the church's exterior shows a dance of death, complete with skeleton musicians. The words painted on the wall are an exhortation concerning death's power over all. Io sont la morte che porto corona, sonte signora di ogni persona, e così son fiera, forte e dura, che trapasso le porte et oltre le mura, et son quella che fa tremar il mondo, rivolgendo mia falce a tondo, ovvero l'arco col mio strale. I am death and wear the crown. I rule over everyone. I am proud, strong, and hard. I pass through doors and over walls. I am feared by the world. Swinging my scythe round and round. Oh, true, the bow with my arrow. For the melody, Branduardi chose an oddly upbeat Schiazzarulla Marazzula, a medieval northern Italian folk tune claimed to have a reputation for accompanying exorcism rites. Confronting death doesn't normally bring to mind a jaunty dance tune. Was Branduardi exorcising death or celebrating it? The finished song exceeded the original text, collected by Louise Zappa. It did not end with death's aim being true, a la Elvis Costello, but changed from a minor key to a major one and made a different claim. You are the guest of honor at this dance played for you. Put aside your scythe and dance around and around, the twirl of one dance and then still yet another, and you will no longer be the queen of time. Decades later, this popular song was noted by fans in comments and blogs that arose during the terrible spring of 2020. The association of death and her crown were seen in the virus being corona. Yet Branduardi was not viewed as having been part of a terrible link in a chain forged again and again in Bergamo. He was not foretelling the horror of an eternal return of plague in an ancient plague ground, but was instead a prophet of sopravvivenza, survival. As a much younger person, it was easier to see or believe in immersion in art as life's prima mobile against death, a promise of immortality, if only in theory. My current self asks whether art is enough. Is any art powerful enough to transcend the unholy marriage of human pathology with the plague whose randomness is enough to drive anyone mad? Perhaps that's always what we've been doing all along, distracting ourselves from the one real certainty, death. I hear something different now when I listen to Branduardi. The mad dance leaves us somewhere else, drained, down to essentials. Beauty is still resistance, but the resistance requires everything we have and more. Taking a cue from Bergman's famous scene whereby the night abjures the artist to slip away when death's attention is elsewhere, Branduardi and Zappa added text and music that provided a way to distract death by by persuading her to put down her scythe and dance around and around. In this way, one might escape her embrace long enough to perform a meaningful deed that will allow others to survive. Unlike the film In Ballo and Fa dicis minore, death is not simply looking away briefly to allow an artist to steal away with his little family. Seduced by Branduardi's whirl, death is called to join in with the living. She feels the music course through her body. She dances.
Yeah. Or else I'll have to speak from the top of my head. A milk crate, right. That's good. That's good. Thank you so much. Okay, that's good. People can hear me? Yes? Okay. As life would have it, I semi-retired, which you can do in the California State University system, the spring of 2020 when COVID began. So my first semester off and my second semester off and my third semester off were all under those conditions. And so I started writing a piece called Zonal, which deals with the fact of COVID and how it affected various sectors of our world. I also wanted to just simply mention quickly, I don't want to be a bringer of bad news, but, COVID is still alive and active among us. My son is a victim of long COVID and has been sick for 2 years. And there are 300 million, at least, long COVID sufferers in the world. And probably more people who don't know that they had it and who are suffering but not knowing that's the cause. So keeping that in mind as well, I'll begin. So these are all, I decided that what I needed to do was write in a form I'd never written before because I was living in a world I had never lived in before. And what I decided to do was write sonnets, which I never write. But I decided to turn them upside down, meaning that if you take, say, a Shakespearean sonnet, which ends with the couplet, those 2 lines at the end that rhyme, I put the couplets first. So my sonnets are 4 stanzas of 2, 3, 4, and 5 lines. Okay, so that was the form for all of the poems that I wrote during this time. And there are about 20 of them that I wrote that the first spring of COVID. And I don't need my glasses to read, so just a bit. Okay, now I can see. We choose to live, choose love as beacon, choose names for fat, slick infants, mucousy with birth, choose kindness for a few, invisibility for the many, whom we honor with our obliviousness. How can you claim to have made a choice when tendrils reach around your shoulders and one creature eats another beyond the sight of our eyes? I have my preference, she told me on the phone, though days outnumber choices in the end. And in the end you have no say, as breath comes slow, then fast, then seizes in the bellows of your lungs. He said he watched his father die at the rural hospital where oxygen was running low. The sun rose and roosters crowed as ever. Strange to die at daybreak, he shut his father's eyes. Okay, I'll go around this way, I think. Time speeded up is comedy, and time slowed down, its opposite. To know the ending is right is a nod to convenience. What can sympathy mean when children die at sea and parents weep and shake a fist? There is a border crisis where borders don't exist, and any more than perfect love or painless birth. The harms accumulate until you gather a lifetime of torn cloth. On the loom she knew the truth, as white and black combine their powers. The death of the artist, the death of the critic, the death of language, the last speakers, two sisters who wouldn't speak to one another. The tragicomic gods own all the real estate, and in the end, the blackness too. And there was a story I read at that time of two sisters who were the last speakers of a language somewhere in South America, and they wouldn't speak to each other. And they were the only two who know it. Such is life. And also, I bring in that mentioned a border crisis, so, border crisis continues. And then within the deaths by COVID, there's other deaths, and this is about the painter. Can't remember the painter's name though. I'll think of it eventually. Anyway, a painter who died, who I knew. Number 8, riding this same subway, planet Earth, a young woman dressed only in a hefty bag had trained her eyes on me. Now nurses wear the same to treat the ill, whose last words won't be heard by loving ears. Cue the narrative, friends. Dystopia now. I watch a documentary about the painter whose work I'd seen that year, how she had continued her disease slower than our current plague, her paintings large and glistening with life. I can't believe I have to leave this world. But must we trade economy for love? When worlds mourn at a distance, nothing to hold except our worry beads and lists of needs. From Lysol to goodbyes, deliver us, we pray. And I still can't remember her name. Paul, do you remember the name of the poet who was married to Bob Homan? Elizabeth. She did a cover. Elizabeth Murray. Okay, Elizabeth Murray. That's about her. Okay. When you get old, you forget names. Number 9. Examples thick with meaning of a boy who left Sweet William at her gate, and of a woman with gray braids who sewed cat masks for her many friends. Uninvited lens descending on our spring, old solstice in a new world of refrigerator trucks and spreadsheets tracking viral load, while lotuses bloom and swans make stillness seek its center. We do not know how we'll discourage the jasmine until a proper window, or Marvin Gaye from playing Ain't No Mountain, on satellites circling our tallies of the dead. My friend watches Pride of the Yankees, Iron Horse, taken in the middle of his day, life limping toward spectacle, grandiloquent, or stumbling out of reach. Be brave for the newsreel. Be grace. You carry it like a shell, the heaviness of words surrounding what we've come to call environment. A student years ago had written of an ecology walk, his story set in the 1950s, anachronistic term in finite time. I told him how we had thrown our bottles in the pond, lit matches in dry fields, ignored translucent moths, the texture of our skin peeling in summer delirium of sun. And now in surfeit we have lost, planet shifting on its axis to shoulder all the waste, redundant fracking zone, birdless vector of regret. What are you in this late day? What sound issues from the glass place you call mirror or self in a world of shattering? Call it zone or area N, how we make songs to suit your space. And I'll read 2 more. The older woes were beads of plastic ocean cramped with string and oil tankers circling in the soup. We pastiched our needs, bought flotsam at the Jetsam store to make a proper flag for life before our current limit. How nothing we predicted came to pass, and everything we never guessed had come to pass. How friends were spared and not in the ellipsis of a season, sirens scorching air on radiant April days. On Hart's Island, ghostly work attends the barges of white shrouds, whose proper lives got captioned by their fates. To look at all the dying, and yet not find the proper words attendant to the grief. How in the future they will sing the loss, in ballads to their children, of a world just opened as another died outside of myth and theory. Magnolia blanketed in dew, moss-thickened gate of a mute and humbled spring. And the last one I'll read also comes from a news story. I'll read it and then I'll tell you the news story. But who can speak now and how to zoom the edges of the text? Can meaning take its storied place on suddenly vacant shores? The middle goes missing from the plot of how we train our minds to follow all but tragedy, mortality pressed behind the ropes of well-earned fears. While we try light and bleach and llama's blood to seek a cure, history shifts its weight. We pass markers for the losses we endure, whole Vietnams of endings, cities falling ill as fruits begin to form in winter's face, and seasons pass in reference to our moons. April 15th, lilacs bloom. The flower moon is pink and low in what we call a firmament of words and signs. We choose to read and voice our fears. The legibility encounters bewilderment. Make sense of time outside of time. Experience upended. The weak coyotes take L.A., flamingos claim Mumbai, and monkeys loot Nepali shrines. How the millions of missing from the tale agreed to disappear. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna just sit with this stool.
Well, you be a little bit more this way.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I think it could still come down a little bit.
All right.
But you want to get within a few inches of it, really.
Okay.
That's just one of those
Ma
things.
ma.
It's just one of those things.
I know it is.
It's show business.
Yes.
Yes, you. Okay, I think.
All right. Thank you. And you know, I want to thank a few people. Particularly Susan. She edited my piece, and she edited the whole book, and she put it together. And it was a lot of work. I'm sure it was. And so, yeah. And also, thank you for the people that have come. It's nice to have an audience, for sure. So I'm going to read portions of Stick Built. I've made a bunch of lines in it, so I'll kind of jump around. I hope it won't be too long. This is the story of a house, but it starts with the more fragile structure of a human body. I had a stroke at 43 more than 20 years ago. In the beginning, I couldn't walk, talk, think, write, or remember my mother's name. Over a few years of hard work, I recovered roughly 95% of what I'd lost, physically and mentally, that is. Financially, I was a wreck. After my mother died, I inherited enough of a down payment on a house. This was after the 2008 housing meltdown, and banks had tightened lending requirements. Like a lot of folks with spotty credit and patched together employment, I couldn't get a mortgage. So I bought a piece of land with cash and acted as the general contractor to build the goddamn house, which may or may not have been cheaper than hiring somebody else to build it. I had to beg and plead and hustle, but now I have lived in my little stick-built house here in Boise for 5 years, and I have few complaints. I thought that life had reached kind of benign stasis. So when my friend's son and his wife needed a cheap place to stay while they looked for a more permanent place to settle, I decided to rent them my house. I could move into the garage. After all, I'd spent a big portion of my life camping, and I'm now living in another garage. Actually, it's a little tent. It's kind of silly. After all, I'd spent a big portion of my life camping. The garage was more or less finished, with real walls and a roof. Their parents and I had been friends for years. I'd been drinking buddies with Lee's dad, and I'd worked with Lee's mom, Helen, whose quirkiness and passion I admired. Like many of us, they'd been solidly middle class, but fallen on hard times. They couldn't give Lee and his wife Cindy the cash they'd need for a down payment in Boise's insanely skyrocketing housing market. Lee and Cindy were still in their 20s, but they had already had 2 boys, 4 and 1 year old. As I got to know them, I could see that Cindy was the most creative, in-control character in the room, or perhaps in the whole damn city. Blonde, attractive, she was the energetic one. Lee worked hard, but he didn't have what you'd call a career. He was a house cleaner, working in expensive homes in the upscale parts of Boise. But he didn't learn enough to make rent on a regular basis. He was handsome, dark to Cindy's blonde, and he spoke with the exaggerated certainty of a man who knows deep down that he's undecided. I knew they were struggling, so I had set the rent for about half of the market rate, $750 a month, with a caveat that I would be using the kitchen, bathroom, and shower when I needed it. I'd give them a 1-year lease so they got a cheap place to live for a while. Mostly, it worked. Toward the end of a year's rental contract, I decided that Lee and Cindy and the kids would have to find a new place to live. I was exhausted. It was a house that I had built, and I couldn't live in it. Around this time, Lee's dad told me that Cindy was pregnant again. I gave them 3 months to find a new place. So they moved into Lee's parents' house because they had no choice. Lee and Cindy had left a few of their possessions in the house, food they'd gotten from a food bank, the metal fire pit, a dresser, some printed rocks left by the older boy. Right before Cindy delivered her third child, I drove over to their parents' house, thinking they might need some of the things that they had left and to deliver the mail that hadn't managed to follow them. I knocked the door. No response. I knocked again. Still no response. Cindy's car was parked in front of the house, so I figured they were there. I opened the front door and heard her shushing the children. I didn't want to intrude, so I left the mail on a side table, saying softly, mail is inside. Then I did some errands and headed to a wine bar to taste their wares. And as I sat drinking a glass of Tempranillo, I listened to my voicemail. Lee's mother had left a message. In a wavering voice, she said, "Mike, I've got to tell you, our son is no longer alive. I'm sorry." She hung up. Here's the odd part. She added, actually in a strangely formal, almost stately locution, before she hung up, "I can receive your condolences and sorrows." And then she hung up. When I learned that Lee had killed himself, I realized that Helen hadn't been able to say it. The death of a child is impossible under any circumstances, but suicide brings behind abysmal guilt, a sense of helplessness, and sometimes a parent is drawn to suicide themselves in the aftermath. The stilted, awkwardly juxtaposed words shielded her in her shock from a grief that was ungovernable. Without Lee, his sons and wife would be living in his parents' small house for months, maybe years. What was Lee thinking? What had he been thinking? Did he fail to see any hope? Maybe not right away, but a few years down the road, I don't know. He loved his wife, his kid, he loved Cindy. He might have been adrift in certain ways, but he was a good man, a good father. The third child would be named after his own father. I've read that there are 8 million people in the United States who are behind on their rent. As I sorted through the complicated feelings after Lee's death, I understood that despite my own difficulties, an accident of birth lands me on the lucky side of a very stark equation. I'm only there still because I'm disciplined and determined not to let the bastards beat me. I took out a reverse mortgage, and I'm using the cash to finish the house. I have to be careful because the reverse mortgage debt didn't just evaporate. I'm not required to make payments, but if you don't, in 20 years, I'll have to relinquish my home. But did I do enough for Lee and Cindy? I assuaged my guilt by thinking that the forces that crushed Lee and heard 3 generations of his family are beyond any individual's influence. The plane is global. London, Paris, Berlin, in Seoul, South Korea, the average price for an apartment has gone up 90% since 2017. Studies show that the lack of affordable housing is determining the outcome of elections, and some believe it influences Britain's wrong-headed decision to leave the European Union. And I would suggest that this is a big part of what happened with Trump. I'm going to go beyond a little bit. What I remember most clearly is how Cindy and Lee loved each other and how tied they were to the kids. The younger boy, Donnie, kept toddling along toward the flames in the fire. Lee pushed him back each time, long before Donnie got too near the fire. Lee was close to his own father, and they had been planning to climb Mount Lassen together, something they had done when Lee was a boy. It's been 4 months since Lee committed suicide. I think about Cindy and her young son's future. Shelter is one of the fundamental needs of a human being, second only to food and water. Are we already in a society where we are jettisoning the weak to save ourselves? The house is quieter now, and I can't say I don't luxuriate in the peace. The Boise River is only a block away. I walk there almost every day. It's beautiful, with its channels, clear pools, riffles. Wildlife is abundant. Osprey, mink, beavers, eagles. Cotton trees shade the banks, and it's not unusual to see somebody fishing. But it's an urban river. Homeless people have tree forts and camps. Like me, they've chosen to live by the river. It's beautiful there under the cottonwoods, but in the winter, it's unendurably cold. So, thank you very much.
That's hard to follow. So this was an essay that, am I okay with the mic? No. Okay, I can sit down. But Mike's taller than me, as is almost everyone.
Do you want to stand or do you want to sit?
I'll stand.
Okay.
This is quite short.
3 or 4 inches from it.
Okay. This is quite short. This is actually the first essay in the book. And, you know, some of you know that I started this magazine just at the beginning of the pandemic. I'd been talking to David Talbot. We were talking about doing something together, and he wasn't quite ready. And I just put something up on the internet. And it was sort of synchronicity. I don't know, Brian Cullman stepped in. And when David ended up not starting another magazine, he was the founder of Salon. So, but anyway, this is one of the first things that Brian wrote, and it is the first essay in the book. And I haven't practiced this. It's called "The Music of Shelter." The transvestites that gather across the street by the gates of the school don't look the same with their N95 masks on. They huddle together, much too close, with oversized handbags and cheap cigarette lighters, and keep their heads down. They're in tight pants or miniskirts, heels way too high, and they pass a blunt back and forth between them. I try to imagine the lipstick they're wearing, purple or shocking pink. I can't. I nod my head as I pass. "Stay safe, Daddy," one calls out. "Stay safe. Ain't nothing good coming." I came down with the virus about 6 weeks ago, maybe more. There was no fever, no sore throat, but I had a dry and constant cough and was exhausted all the time. I'd sleep for 9 or 10 hours, get up, get dressed, and then go back to bed. I had no sense of smell, and there was a sharp metallic taste in my mouth, like I'd been chewing on rusted hubcaps all night. Everyone I know who's gotten sick with this complains about that taste of metal. That's the constant. Apart from that, all our symptoms are different, but the metal taste is there for all of us. And for all of us, the air tastes stale and secondhand. Years ago, I lived on 16th Street and 3rd Avenue across from Joe Jr.'s. And just below 15th Street, there was a secondhand cheese store. For a few dollars, you could buy an enormous wheel of cheese that was a few hours, maybe a day away from going bad. If you were having a party in, say, 20 minutes, it was a place to go. But the air in there had that strange smell of something turning, something in transition. It smelled of long-gone locker rooms and of butter and death. It wasn't unpleasant. A friend died of COVID-19 last week. He couldn't get an ambulance to take him to the hospital, and his lungs gave out. He'd been ill for about 10 days, maybe 12. He'd start to feel better, like he was on the mend. Then the virus would sneak up and knock him down again till there was no breath left in him. He died in a small apartment on the Upper West Side with his wife and daughter around him. The ambulance that wouldn't pick him up and take him to hospital also wouldn't pick him up and take him to a funeral home or morgue. There were no cars available. His wife and daughter were alone with him, and the hours went by. They covered him with an old gray blanket, but his feet stuck out. They worried that his feet were cold, so they found a green towel they could cover them with, and they waited. Sometime that night, an artist they knew offered his help, and one of the art vans that usually transported his work to MoMA or the Whitney or to art storage in Long Island City was hired to transport the body to a funeral home on the Upper East Side. There was still artwork wrapped and stored in the back of the van, an early Basquiat or Wayne Thiebaud. He'd spent his life surrounded by art of every description. He was right at home, except maybe for the green towel. Once you've had this virus and come out the other side, once you stop sleeping all day long, once the air stops tasting stale, and once that metal taste goes away, no one knows if you're really in the clear, whether you can come down with it again or with some variation of it. No one seems to know anything. All we know is the ambulance isn't coming. So, questions for our writers? Anyone have questions, thoughts, pronouncements?
Question for you.
Yeah, right.
What next?
Oh, what next? For the magazine or for books? You know, that's a great question. We have constantly reevaluated what we're doing because the magazine started very spontaneously. We had, I think we all know, no business plan. But I don't know what other people are feeling, and I would like to hear. Ryan and I talk about this every few months. Should we even keep going? And what are we doing? What direction do we want to go in? We had a fiction issue, which we loved doing. But I think now, and there were, during the height of everything going on with the protest, the George Floyd, we were publishing all the time, partly because I never went out. But, and Brian wasn't going out a lot either. But I think now we really want to look at history. I think we've all feel that politics have failed us. Our political system may be failing. And we are trying to understand what's happening because it's not anything that's happened in most of our lifetimes. I told a few of you privately, we just ran a piece about Gorbachev and Yeltsin and the decline of the Soviet Union, and how then Putin is brought in to stabilize the country. We're looking for echoes, or, as Mark Twain said, history rhymes. I think that while we're still devoted to being timely, we also are looking for a way to help our readers and help ourselves feel less at sea. We always wanted, there's that phrase, provide aid and comfort to the enemy. We actually wanted to provide aid and comfort to our friends and to our larger tribe that we had assembled. We really felt that this was what we knew how to do. I'm very squeamish. I wasn't going to go volunteer in a hospital. And this was our skill set. So we are still trying to do this combination of very analytical, unbiased, and I stress that, fair-minded journalism, literary journalism, and literary nonfiction, really utilizing all of the speciation of nonfiction that occurred in the academy while journalism stagnated. So I think we're looking at history now to try to find handholds. And we hope you will all subscribe to the magazine. It's free or pay what you want. We have several levels of subscription. Of course, we would love to have you pay. But if you don't have the money, it's free. We don't want to ever keep anyone out. And we have now moved to Substack as well, where suddenly we're getting readers. I'm not quite sure how it's happening. And we may do podcasts. We might do video podcasts, because there are some people I'd really like to interview. Sarah Chase wrote an incredible book on corruption in America that didn't get enough attention. She's very storied writer, I think corruption is the overlooked issue, and perhaps the one thing that might reach the brainwashed people. So, yes, anything else? And I'm sure our other writers would also like to. We can all have a glass of wine. Okay, thank you so much for coming, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to the readers, all of you, and everybody really who's written for the magazine. Okay, great. Okay, buy tote bags and take a sticker.